Hi, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, whichever part of the world that you are in. We're very happy to welcome you to the second day or day two of the WHO Informal Consultation on People Living with Diabetes. My name is Asha Samaru, and I am one of the co-chairs together with Apurva Gomba. Apurva?
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whichever part of the world you're logging in from. But for me, it's early morning, and I think for Asha too. So
Yes.
let's get started.
Right. So I will introduce myself and then Apurva will. So, my name is Asha Samaru, as I said before. I am a person living with type 2 diabetes and have been so for the past, well, over 20 years. I am also on insulin. I am the vice president of the Diabetes Association of Trinidad and Tobago, a country which is in the Caribbean. And I am also part of the Our Views, Our Voices program as an advocate. So I'm really happy to be co-chairing, and I pass it over to Apurva.
Thank you so much, Asha. So, a little bit about myself. I am Purva, and I'm a physician by training. I am a global advocate with T1 International and have been on the leadership committee of Beyond Type 1 for over like 4 years now. And I've been involved with NCD Alliance and a lot of IDF global advocacy work. But way back, so I'm originally from India, and in India, we have a lot of advocacy interventions going. So we have a group which is now growing called Diabetes India Youth in Action, and we have a lot of patient voices coming out from there. Currently, I am not in India. I'm in Boston, so I'm logging in from there. But I'm here to pursue my further public health degree, and I'm working with Jocelyn Diabetes Center. So now going further into the session, I just want to say that we all bring such unique perspectives of type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, and just perspectives about the lived experience. Like yesterday, we heard from Dr. Guy Phones that it is not about just having the disease, it's about being as a support. It's about just being there, be it father, mother, child, or a spouse, just being there and having an experience to support each other and as we drive for change. So before I hand over to Asha, I just want to say that Asha and me met just exactly 1 year back, 1 month before the pandemic, sitting on a bus going for advocacy drive to Sharjah. And I think that's where our journey started. And we never knew that we'll be co-chairing today on a virtual background. So here we are. So over to you, Asha, to head start with day two.
Thank you, Apurva, for reminding we met 1 year ago. And it's really nice to be co chairing with you. And it is my pleasure to do a recap on what went on in day one. The key part of what went on, I would say, was when the participants went into breakout rooms, and each person had to choose, whether they were into advocacy, partnerships, implementation, and governance. And each group had very good discussions. I was part of the implementation group, so I knew that we had a lot of discussions. We had a short time because of what happened, but we're hoping that the breakout groups would have more time today. But each group eventually presented, and I was really happy to know that each group got the opportunity to present. So some of the things that came out of yesterday, I will say it in points, were the people living with diabetes, point one, want the WHO to move away tokenistic gestures such as focusing on storytelling only to partnership, example, fully embedding people living with diabetes in the design, the delivery, implementation, evaluation, and governance of programs, policies, principles, and advocacy. This might require the development of standard operating procedures. Two, the WHO should provide global guidance for engagement that can be adapted by people living with NCDs and other stakeholders for regional and national purposes, ensuring that these guidelines are tailored equitably and appropriately for culture and context. Three, to scale up platforms for evidence based education and about diabetes for individuals, families, healthcare workers, the media, etc., sensitive to language and cultural differences. And 4, to widen the circle of engagement beyond the static ways of engaging with a handful of organizations, only to audiences beyond our echo chamber. So how can the WHO and people living with diabetes work together to reach more diverse audiences and to facilitate participation from people beyond the group convened? These are some of the things that we will be delving further into today and tomorrow. And so that was just a short recap of what we discussed yesterday as part of the groups. And I will now hand over to Apurva to talk about the objectives for today.
Thank you, Asha. So we all are bringing lots of energy, and I know the passion of making a difference in diabetes has come to the brim, and now it's emitting out of the screens because we all want to be put together in real and doing this work from the beginning. So now setting the stage for day 2. Now from the key objectives of co-creating, translating actions, dreams, and your lived experience into reality, as Dr. Bente quoted yesterday, we will today identify the key objective of identifying those key messages and strategizing to amplify the effective advocacy tools on diabetes informed by people living with diabetes and other lived experiences. There was a very strong quote shared by Sana yesterday that we need to move beyond storytelling, and people with diabetes have expertise to share and bring on the table. So we will begin from there. And just to brief you a little about how this will set up for the day 3, we will take all the advocacy tools from today and define the next steps of operationalizing meaningful engagement with people living with diabetes within the NCD department and the Global Diabetes Compact 2021-2022. So I will now ask Jack and Elena to open up the Slido. So we have questions coming up on the screen. And if you have any issues with the Slido, just drop in the chat box so we can help you with that. But there will be a pop-up QR code on the screen, and you can just scan it from your phones and get on Slido. So Jack, if you can share the Slido. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Apurva, for that. Yeah, so thank you so much, Apurva, and thank you for introducing the Slido. We're aware that there was some issues with not everyone being able to access this yesterday, but we definitely hope to address some of those connectivity issues today. However, before we jump into the Slido, maybe I'll pass to Elena, who will be introducing a very new recent announcement, which will be very relevant to what Dr. Bente Nicholson was mentioning yesterday regarding the stags. Elena, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Jack. Before I go ahead with the announcement, if you scroll to the beginning of the chat in the chat box, for anyone who had issues using Slido, in particular accessing it via the QR code, I've detailed here for you how you can participate in Slido. It's really easy. You just have to go to Slido, that link there, enter the meeting code, which I've copy pasted there for you. And there's also a photo in case you don't know. So the photo that I've uploaded there, you can see where to enter the meeting code. And then you're ready to participate. There's no login, nothing. It's really easy. And we're looking forward to you being able to participate actively. The other thing, if your name isn't accurately identifiable on your Zoom, perhaps rename yourself. You can do that simply by clicking, I think, on the picture or on your name, and it should give you a renaming option, and that allows us to kind of know better who it is if you have your video off. All right, so with regards to the announcement that I'm about to make, this is an exciting announcement that is applying to the discussions that we had about governance yesterday. So the WHO has just opened calls for experts for 3 groups, and we have listed here two in particular. There's what the WHO calls strategic and technical advisory groups, and those exist for all of the different disease areas in WHO. For some reason, for NCDs, this hasn't been the case. And so now there is going to be a strategic and technical advisory group on NCDs. And underneath that strategic and technical advisory group, or short STAG, there is a technical advisory group on diabetes. So now just a little bit on what the purpose of these groups are. So the aim of both of these groups is basically to help WHO with strategic guidance to NCDs more broadly and to diabetes specifically. And for diabetes, the aim here is really to strengthen international and national action to reduce premature mortality from diabetes through both prevention and treatment, to progressively cover additional people with health services, medicines, vaccines, diagnostics, and health technologies, and to strengthen efforts to address diabetes as part of universal health coverage. These groups are open for applications from experts by the 30th of April. And I think in some of the groups yesterday, we had discussed how people living with diabetes want to approach representation in WHO processes more broadly, but also in governance. And perhaps tomorrow, in the second half of the day tomorrow, when we're looking kind of at next steps, etc., maybe we can return to the discussion of how we want to approach this call for experts, for example. Like, is this something where anyone who's interested just applies, or is there some sort of pre-selection process where this group, for example, wants to make certain recommendations? So what I would suggest is that we park this for today and come back to this tomorrow. We'll also share in the chat the links to more information about these groups. But I just wanted to let you know that this is happening, and it's really one of the first opportunities for people living with to be represented at the table where decisions are being made about how the WHO approaches the global diabetes response. Back to you, Jack.
Thank you so much, Elena. And maybe before we go to the Slido, I just want to say and reiterate what I mentioned yesterday in terms of this is a WHO consultation, but we very much want and wish for the lived experience to be driving the narrative and discussions across all the breakout discussions, but also you'll see that lived experience is integrated to the co-chairs in terms of the speakers, and also the breakout session facilitators as well. So we hope you're already feeling comfortable. I'm sure we'll begin even more feeling at home, if not already, in day 2 of our consultation. And I think we fully acknowledge the group chat yesterday was amazing. There was so much great interactions happening there. We very much welcome you to use the group chat again. Feel free to introduce yourselves. There might be new people in the room. And again, I think it'll be lovely to see that interaction continue to grow over the second day and third day as well. And then last but not least, in the Dropbox link that we shared with you last night, and again, we can share this in the group chats, we've now added some suggested social media tweets. Now, we don't want to be too prescriptive. That's why they're suggested. Feel free to tweak them and adjust them as you see fit. And you'll also see some social media tiles. And I know many of you have been very active already on social media, and that's really great to see. So hopefully this can add to your activity as we go forward today and tomorrow. So if I could have the next slide, please. Hopefully now we're going to go on to 2 quick Slido questions. So again, please feel free to follow Elena's instructions in the group chat. You can join by, I say, entering that URL and the code there, or if you wish to use the QR code, then please feel free to use your phones and your cameras to do so. So hopefully now I'm going to share my screen and we can see the first question for today. So first question is a poll. And the question is, when I see diabetes discussed in the news and by governments, how well do these discussions reflect my lived experience? And the options are very poorly, somewhat poorly, very well, somewhat well, or neither well nor poorly. So we have over 30 people so far, but there's still results coming through. I think there's definitely some room for improvement, as we have a quite a strong skew towards somewhat poorly and very poorly. So hopefully lots of opportunities to identify where those gaps exist in terms of advocacy around diabetes and how we can hopefully try to optimize and be more strategic and effective in our communications to those different stakeholders. And I see as the results are continuing, it seems that we still have that same balance. So I might, that question will be left open, and maybe we can go to our second question of our check-in. So in your opinion then, what are the biggest opportunities going forward in terms of global diabetes advocacy? And this is a word cloud, so feel free to add a couple of words into here, and we should see these popping up anytime soon. So what are the biggest opportunities going forward in terms of global diabetes advocacy? So ensuring individuals have a seat at the decision-making tables, and a global fund has been used as an example. We're saying, wow, there's quite a lot coming in now. So quite a big jump in. It's great to see. So UHC has been mentioned, education, a really strong theme which came up yesterday in the breakout discussions. The strong focus on narrative, diversity, again, very much aligning with yesterday's breakout discussion. Partnerships, balance, which is very interesting. These are now moving at a rapid pace, so thank you. It's great to see so much interaction. Narratives, including mental health, very important. Human rights, I saw pop up there as well. A new narrative, well, that's a very interesting one. Hopefully that's something which we will tap into today in terms of our panel discussions and our breakout discussions as well. Partnerships with civil society organizations. Wow, really quite a lot here, and including people living with diabetes as experts, which again, very much aligns with both what was discussed yesterday and what with the opportunity that Elena just mentioned a couple of minutes ago. Super. Well, I think now I will leave this open for a couple of minutes, so feel free to continue to add to this. And I think we now will hand back to the co-chairs who will introduce our first panel today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jack. What we want to do is to go straight on to our panel, and our panel is Expert Inside Strategic Communication, and I want to introduce Daniel Hunt, Non-Communicable Diseases from the WHO.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. My name is Daniel Hunt. I hold a communications role in WHO's Department for NCDs. Thank you for a really fascinating and inspiring day yesterday. Last night, I was thinking lots about an insight from Elizabeth Pfister that people with a lived experience of diabetes should be treated like the experts we are. And from working in comms, I echo Riva and Kaya's words yesterday that one of the barriers to realizing this expertise is not just telling our stories and stopping there, but translating those stories into meaningful advocacy, influence, and co-creation. And the size of that word cloud shows me how much we have to share. And I also note that no one answered very well for the accuracy of public narratives. This panel session focuses on gathering key insights in strategic communications from global diabetes advocacy. We can motivate our key target audiences, whether governments, journalists, or researchers, to act on what we have to give them. To treat us like the experts we are, we need them to hear us like the experts we are. But that's enough. You don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from our three wonderful speakers. They will provide their expert insights on strategic comms with lessons from their ample experiences around the world in advocacy and research. I really encourage you to reflect on their words and how you can use them in our breakout sessions, in the chat, and beyond our three days together. So with no further ado, I'm delighted to pass you over to Christelle Marchand-Abrigliano, who will be known to many of you for her insights as a Chief Advocacy Officer at Beyond Type 1. Christelle, over to you.
Good morning, and thank you so much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I want to start, I've always been fascinated by language and its impact on us as people, just in general. And in fact, my undergraduate degree is in language because I'm just simply fascinated by it. What I heard yesterday is that I'm not the only one who looks at language as important in our community. And we talked a lot about how we identify ourselves as diabetic or a person with diabetes or a person living with diabetes, and that we need to create tools and resources and translate across multiple languages. And I love that we shared so many stories and we heard so many amazing people, which just affirmed to me, and I hope to everybody else, why we're committed to supporting the global diabetes impact. We share a common language within our own community, and that's because diabetes is a language all its own. And we are the native speakers and we are fluent. I wanted to point out, however, what was missing. The flowery academic language when we talk amongst ourselves. And as we look to want to share our advocacy messaging with the public and with policymakers, we are the translators and we are the teachers, not just simply advocates. So all advocacy brings something new to the table. And first and foremost, it brings awareness to an issue through storytelling. But stories are just the beginning. Advocacy, I believe, at its heart is molding and carefully crafting a path to influence others to help find solutions that benefit everybody, not just people with diabetes or people living with diabetes, but also our governments, also the public. And it's not just pointing out solutions and problems, but it is making sure that we give people a path. So we can't simply demand a single solution to the issue of diabetes and then sit back and expect other people to figure it all out. And I think that we've learned this over the years. We need to work alongside other experts as guides, or in our particular case, as translators. So there are books and even degrees in strategic communication. Deanne is a perfect example of somebody who does strategic communications for a living. I'm going to save you some time and I'm going to give you the short version. It boils down for me to answering these questions. What's the issue? What are the right stories we want to tell? What's the data, the numbers, the evidence that we want to share? Do we have solutions? Are they more than one? How can we share this to get to the outcome that we all want? And I say all in globally what we want. And perhaps most importantly, what do we consider a step forward? For me, effective advocacy, it weaves personal and community experiences with the facts in such a way that decision makers and the public can clearly understand and support mutually beneficial solutions and opportunities to immediately take action to get us there. And so through what I believe is a unified strategic communication strategy that I hope that we can start here today now, we can be provocative without being mean. We can be humorous without being disrespectful. We can celebrate lives lived without forgetting lives lost. And we can be supportive and recognize that our community needs different things, but we need most of all to translate our community's messages of not just hope, but of solutions. And I know that we can do this because I've seen it happen. In December, the WHO published an update to the ranking of global leading causes of death. And from 2000 to 2019, deaths from diabetes increased by 70%. And deaths from diabetes is now the 9th leading cause of death globally. However, at the same time, deaths from HIV and AIDS dropped from 8th to the 19th leading cause of death. And it states that the success is from efforts in preventing infections, increasing testing, and access to treatment. We can do the same with diabetes, and we just need to translate what we know is possible and teach the language of diabetes throughout the world and provide others outside the community with solutions and data and hope with our stories. And while I've lived in other countries, I grew up and I currently live in the United States. So my examples that I'm going to give are just US policy centric. And that's what I do at Beyond Type 1. I'm the Chief Advocacy Officer. My hope is that this can start to spark conversations and perhaps ideas for translations on local and country and even global levels. So Beyond Type 1.
1 minute, please, Christelle. Sorry. Thank you.
Sure. Hope to change the coverage, policies through storytelling, and to provide stories and immediate action for people like Mason and Esme. And you can find this information on the Beyond Type 1 website. We in the United States combined efforts both with people with diabetes as well as provider organizations through both direct and grassroots lobbying. We sent thousands of letters to get coverage for continuous glucose monitors for people living with diabetes on insulin over the age of 65. We could not do this without our community coming together. And our stories matter and our voices matter, and we're the experts in the lived experience. And I think that we can share our best practices and build the tools and the resources that go beyond social media and the internet. And because of the fact that WHO has 6 official languages, which is Arabic and Chinese, Spanish, and French, and Russian, there are people here with diabetes who are not here. And what I'm hoping is that as we build our stratified and strategic communication strategy, we can reach these people. And I know it's possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Christelle. Just looking at the chat, I can see that's been a real tour de force. And from being provocative, humorous, supportive, and angry, I think that's a really important point. We're all translators of a language in which people with lived experience are fluent. So thank you. And I hope that some of the examples you've given we can reflect on in discussions throughout the day. I'm now delighted to introduce you to a brilliant colleague and friend, Lauren Carters-White, who will talk to us about the role of values-based messaging as a strategic communication tool for advocating and communicating with impact. Lauren, take it away.
Great, thank you. Just if we can move to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. If it will click through. Brilliant, that's that there. Okay, awesome. So thank you, Dan, and thank you for inviting me along here today. It's been great to hear so far what's been discussed and what was mentioned yesterday as well. So as Dan said, my name is Dr. Lauren Carters-White, and I am a research fellow here at the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, hence the big scarf, because it's really cold here today. So what I'm here to talk to you about is a way of constructing your messaging when looking at health promotion, and that is called values-based framing, and hopefully it will be helpful for you all today. So just next slide, please. So as I'm sure you already know, the importance of good messaging is key. So clear and considered messaging is vital for health promotion, and an inconsistent approach to messaging can really undermine the ability to present clear and compelling case for evidence-based action. An issue that occurs a lot when you're a public health researcher for public health research messaging is often that it focuses on the clear, but not necessarily the compelling. And I think this is where people with lived experience can really come in and really help us in public health better improve that. So public health messaging can often focus on facts, statistics, and data, which is of course really, really important. But there also is a heavy emphasis on what many interventions or policies seek to stop or prevent. So language around banning, for example, if we're talking about marketing or limiting, all quite negative kind of aspects, or it focuses on individual behaviours. Sorry, I'm just going to click that off there. But often there's actually little focus on what different policies and interventions can give. So little value on the, or little information on the value of policies or intervention, or what could be quite positive about it. And this is something in public health that I think we can definitely improve on. And it makes it quite difficult when discussing at a policy level, how you can relate those policies or interventions to real life. Next slide, please. So first of all, what is values-based framing? And this is an alternative to the public health messaging approach that we often see at the moment. So values-based framing involves engaging with people's deeply held values to motivate concern and therefore action. And it looks at framing messages strategically to tap into these deeply held values, so things like fairness or responsibility or autonomy. And the aim of that is to increase the likelihood of supporting causes, because it not just changes the way people think about an issue, but about how they feel about an issue. And Vic Health in Australia are an excellent example of employing such framing. That's a lot of their work here that I'm drawing on today. Next slide, please. So Vic Health give 4 key tips when you're thinking about your messaging. So the first is to externalise a problem. So focus on external barriers to healthier living rather than looking at blaming individuals. I think this is really, really important. Using values and not facts. So appeal to deeply held values such as fairness or autonomy. Sticking to your story, don't try and tell theirs, and don't myth bust. So with that, sometimes you can see that people are told that their views are wrong, and then you undermine that, and often that can really confuse messaging and make it quite difficult for any kind of other views to be taken on, because you've started off from perhaps a slightly more negative standpoint. And then the fourth is this idea, something that I'm really quite passionate about, is creating something good in your messaging. So framing the value as something, speaking about what's positive about it and what it could give rather than what it takes away. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is just work through a bit of an example. So my area of expertise is looking at regulating food marketing to children. So I come from a policy public health background. And when we look at framing for advocating for regulating food marketing, it tends to come from kind of this more negative sort of framing. So often words used are things like banning or restricting or limiting. We often focus on industry bad tactics, which is not a bad thing, but often it just adds this kind of negative kind of idea around any kind of policy on regulating food marketing. And also there's quite a heavy emphasis on the failing of previous policies, but not looking really forward, but what is it that we can improve on what's been done before. A values-based framing approach would, first of all, potentially highlight the potential for this policy to create a fairer, healthier environment for children to grow up in. Another option you could maybe look at is helping parents to guide children towards healthier dietary preferences rather than blaming parents, which is often sometimes a message that gets heard quite a lot. And then the third is around kind of tapping into those core values around autonomy or fairness, and this idea how regulating food marketing can actually help parents and children have more autonomy over their diet, because there's not this pervasive marketing out there. So that's just one really quick example of how we can perhaps shift the framing around messaging. Next slide, please. So just quickly, some insights to consider. Dan asked me to put these together, so I thought I would just give you some 3. So first, there is a need to strike a balance between using the evidence-based and value-based framing, but how do we achieve this without going one way or the other? Need to shape value-based framing depending on the audience, so what is effective for one may not be effective for another. And value-based framing provides an opportunity to strengthen messaging surrounding diabetes care and public health policy, and remembering to highlight the good, which I think really speaks to what Christelle was saying earlier as well. So that is me. I think that's the last slide. The next slide is just references, which are pretty boring. So that's me. Thanks, Dan.
That's superb. Thank you, Lauren. And if I can be candid about my time working at WHO, I think your point about focusing on the clear but not the compelling is something that we struggle with all the time. So how we feel about an issue, not just think about an issue, is so, so important. So thank you very much. So our final speaker for this session, I'm delighted to share with you, delighted to introduce Renza Shibilia, who might win the prize for coming to us from the furthest time zone. She's awake in the middle of the night all the way from Australia, who will give us her reflections on how we win hearts and minds in global diabetes advocacy. So Renza, take it away.
Thanks, Dan. I'm joining this meeting from the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and other Aboriginal elders as well of other communities who may be with us today. There is so much noise when it comes to health advocacy. There really is. So one of the things that we need to be able to do is to cut through. So what we've heard from Christelle and from Lauren are brilliant techniques of how we can do that. One of the things that I've learnt in 20 years nearly of working in diabetes advocacy and in diabetes organisations is that going in and sharing our stories is never enough, and going in and sharing the data is never enough. But when you bring together both of them, you win hearts and you win minds, and suddenly it's a lot more difficult for legislators, for policymakers, for educators, for anybody who we are trying to listen, to get to listen to us. It's a lot harder for them to ignore us. And one of the things that we have learnt is that we do that by partnering with the right people. And we ensure that we don't only ever hear one story. I am frequently asked as a person living with type 1 diabetes if I can please be the representative. Can you please tell your story? Tell your story. Well, my story is really boring. It's no less or more legitimate than anyone else's, but it is one story. So now I ask when there is a panel, I want to know who else is telling their story. And if everybody looks and sounds like me, I'm not interested in being there. And I think that that's something that's really critical. We can't win those hearts if we're only hearing one sort of story, because suddenly people start to drown out. They're not listening. They start to zone out, I should say. One of the other things that we've really learned is that when we stand a person with diabetes up to tell their story and to be really passionate about it, to talk about how diabetes impacts, and then we bring somebody next to us to provide that evidence, there is such a compelling message there. It is so compelling. The way that I describe it in a way that's probably a little bit cheeky, and I don't in any way mean to put down what I do, but I say that I get up and I wave my hands around, because I do that a lot when I talk, and I talk about, you know, this is my life with diabetes, this is how it impacts. And there's nothing better than having a researcher step up after me and say, and here's the evidence to support what she's saying. Hearts and minds. And it's really very, very interesting to see how we have changed the response since we've started doing that. I work for Diabetes Australia, which is the national diabetes organisation, and we are now very, very good at ensuring that we bring together the two stories. We work in alliances that involve consumer organisation or peer organisations like ours. We're the peak body for people living with and affected by diabetes. We work closely with JDRF, who have a similar role, but then we will also work alongside professional bodies of diabetes educators and endocrinologists. When we come together, we have a very, very loud voice. We cover the whole spectrum of what we're trying to say, and it's not easy to dismiss us. When you have one person standing up there, it's too easy to say, well, that's just one person, that's just their story. When you present a panel of people, when you present hundreds of voices, suddenly it's not easy to dismiss. When you've got data on top of that, it's even more valuable. Another thing that's really important of bringing the two together, Christelle spoke about language. Language is an absolute passion of mine. Diabetes Australia launched a language position statement. I think I may have shared this in the chat yesterday. We shared this and we developed this and shared it 10 years ago based on research, but it came from the diabetes community. And what that's meant is that we have changed the language. We've changed the way that we speak about diabetes, not just as patient organisations, but also we've encouraged and we've been able to influence the media. We've been able to influence professionals. We've been able to influence researchers. We've moved away as much as we can, but definitely not enough yet from the blame, from the shame, from the stigmatizing people with diabetes. We now demand that when there is a media story, they don't dehumanize people by cutting off their faces or showing people walking down the street from behind. We want to hear their stories. We want to see their faces because they're very real. So my takeaway is actually really, really simple. How do we go about winning hearts and minds? And the way that we do that is that we bring together every single thing we have, because that is when our story is powerful. That is when our advocacy cuts through the noise. And that's when we stay ahead of the game. And that's how we do it. Thank you.
Superb, thank you. And I'm kind of staggered that we're running on time as well, given you've all provided such thorough and comprehensive insights. I would like to ask each of our speakers now to provide some brief reflections, just hearing your other two counterparts speak. If you could leave us with sort of one thing you learned from everybody speaking. So I'm happy to give you mine to get us going. From hearing you, Christelle, I think the biggest thing for me was all of the added value that people who have a lived experience of diabetes can bring that you just can't get anywhere else. And there's a real gap there if we don't try and make the most of that. For Lauren, I think couching not only our messaging in terms of data and stats, but also in terms of really powerful principles of fairness, of autonomy, of respect and dignity, can really, really drive us forward. And then Rensa, I love the idea of bringing hearts and minds, but one specific thing, the fact that you've worked with Diabetes Australia to produce that language position statement and giving guidance to media and journalists about how to report on diabetes is a really great practical tool to help make sure that we can overcome some of the stigma. And I know that's a theme we'll be discussing later today. So those are my brief reflections. I wondered if I could ask for yours. So perhaps Christelle, if you'd be happy to start.
I think that listening to all the good, right? Lauren talked about the way that we can be positive and still get our message across, and the ability to hearts and minds and merge the data and our stories and then translate that is an amazing thing.
Perfect, thank you. Lauren?
Great, yeah, both Christelle and Rensa, that was fantastic presentations. I really enjoyed that. So I think for Christelle, one thing that really stuck out to me was this idea around not just being translators and teachers, or you are the translators and teachers and not just advocates. I think that was a really important thing. And for Rensa, again, this idea of cutting through the noise, winning hearts and minds, and sharing the data and the stories as well. I think just a really, really strong message moving forward. But yeah, great, thank you.
Lovely.
I think so. There were two things that Christelle said, I think, that absolutely, are really staying with me. And one of them was about celebrating lives, but remembering lives lost. And I think that is absolutely critical. We stand on the shoulders of so many people who have lost their lives, and we need to do better. We need to do better for them. And I think also, I always appreciate when people mention language. So Christelle's comments about language also, were wonderful, very, very much so. Lauren, I really love the example that you gave, because I've been involved in my role at Diabetes Australia in junk food advertising to kids. And I think that we have so much to learn from other campaigns. We keep recreating the wheel. There was so much in there in just, your few slides that I thought, gosh, we can take that and we can adapt so much of that in diabetes. So thank you for doing that so beautifully and concisely. And the slides are being shared, right? So I'm hoping that we can hold on to that for later on. But thank you.
Superb. Thank you, everybody. And yes, we'll make sure that we can share all of the slides from today. So my final thing to say, just for all attendees, please reflect on the insights from this session and Molly's panel session to come. We really hope that you can use some of the enthusiasm and the discussions and themes to help guide your conversations in our breakout sessions this afternoon, in the chat feature today and tomorrow, and then just beyond our 3 days together. So thank you very much. And I'm delighted that I get to pass back over to our co-chairs ahead of time. Thank you to all of our speakers.
Thank you so much, Dan. This was a fabulous session and so bang on time. Like, I'm so surprised. So while this presentation by Crystal, Renza, and Lauren was fantastic. My takeaway message from here, from what Crystal said, is translating and teaching the language of diabetes to the world. And how Renza just says, we need to like cut through that noise and just bring our actions to reality. So while we move on to our next panel, I would like to introduce Molly Lepesca from Health Action International, and a fantastic panel of three amazing panelists. And we're going to be talking about, does it matter to speak about type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes in silos, or do we kind of bring it everything on the table and make the action and cut through that noise real hard? So over to you, Molly, and let's begin the panel now.
Great, thank you very much, Apurva, and thank you so much for that last discussion. It was really informative and super interesting. I think the idea of sharing stories and sharing data is never enough. I mean, it really rung true to me. So I'm really looking forward to this panel. I think this is such an interesting topic, and I think it's one that really needs to be discussed within the diabetes community, of how we can come together sort of as a large community. Obviously, there's many differences amongst what we do. So I think having this discussion is really going to help us think about these things. So my name is Molly Lepesca. I live in the Netherlands. I work on the Access study, which looks at global the global diabetes, or sorry, the global access to insulin market, and see what the barriers are. And so we've been working now for 6 years, and now we're trying to look nationally how we can improve access to insulin. I think, to me, one thing about why this panel is so important is, so I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 21, and sort of have had an experience where I've only lived as an adult with diabetes, and I think saw right away sort of the differences in treatment between type 1 and type 2. My family is full of people living with type 2 diabetes, and I think sometimes it's so surprising to me why there's so much stigma, whereas for people living with type 1, actually they're looked at as sort of this blameless entity, and why is that sort of not given for people with type 2? And I think we have so much to learn from each other, and there's so many messages that each of us can, help improve, especially for advocacy. So I think that's why it would be really great to hear from our panelists, who all have unique experiences from 3 different parts of the world. So we are going to try and do a discussion rather than sort of one, each person just talking. So we'll see how it goes. What I'm going to do is just let each of the panelists introduce themselves, and then go into that first question, and then we'll have 3 questions. So basically, I'll let them introduce themselves. So similar, I hope I said that right. Tara and Peiyan, we will start right now, and I'll just give you the first question, which is just to introduce yourself and then answer the first question sort of briefly. In terms of global advocacy, what do you see as a unique strength from your perspective as either a person living with type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, or of course somebody who's sort of had experience in both? So I will start with Peiyan, if you could begin.
Okay, hello everybody. I guess I win the second prize for being the latest in time zone. It's 9 p.m. at my time now. Yeah, hi, I'm Peiyan from Singapore. Yes, and I have been living with type 2 diabetes for about 25 years already and counting. And so to answer Molly's question in terms of global advocacy, what a unique strength. For me, it's really about sharing lived experience stories to everybody. And whether, no matter how small they are, there will always be somebody who can associate with you, find comfort in your stories, and who can learn from your experiences. These experiences that we bring, it's really, really very powerful and comforting to everybody else in the diabetes community. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I like that word, find comfort. I thought that was, it really spoke to me. Okay, Tara, do you want to go ahead? It's the same question.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Tiara Smith. Been living with diabetes since 2017. I was misdiagnosed with type 2, but then later found out I had LATA, which is a form of type 1. I would say from my experiences, recognizing that our challenges are very similar outside of course, like the very clinical differences between type 1 and type 2. But a lot of our challenges when it comes to making sure that we have a provider who listens to us, making sure that we're being able to afford or access diabetes technology and medications, all of those are experiences that I've had, as well as other people who have been misdiagnosed, but also I'm seeing that for people with type 1 and type 2. What is interesting from my point of view is, and this is what you mentioned earlier, Molly, is that there is this stigma for people with type 2, where it's like it's very individualized. Like, you know, you caused it, so you're on your own. At least that's what the attitude is. That's the attitude here in the US. But I think from my experience, it really shouldn't have to be that way, because we're all facing a lot of the same challenges. We're all trying to mitigate the risks of living with diabetes in general. So, yep.
Thank you.
Molly, you're muted.
Molly, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Sorry, Tiara, I didn't mean to say your name wrong. I'll work on it for next time.
All right, thank you.
And here's another name I probably will say wrong, so I apologize. Sigamlak, do you want to answer the same question, please?
Okay, you said it right. So my name, I'm Sigamlak from Ethiopia. So I've been living with type 1 diabetes for the past 20 years. So I'm going to celebrate my 23rd anniversary tomorrow. So it's a great day. So yes, as a global, what we have as a strength, from my perspective, is most of the time we face different same kinds of challenge in my country, especially with diagnosis and mainly with the treatments. And and mostly people are mistreated, especially type 1, by considering them as an adult and giving them the same kinds of way of life and treatment, so that most, especially the users, get confused most of the time.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that's an important message, especially, I mean, I think I was just thinking about both type 1 and type 2 and thinking about some of the struggles I know a lot of people have in different countries about things like diagnostics. And I think that's, to me, that's one issue that actually everybody sort of shares, just to think about for the future. So Tiara, you had mentioned already about stigma with type 2. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about some of the challenges in terms of advocacy messaging that you think are unique either to type 1 or type 2.
I love this question. I think we've had a lot of discussions today about language, and I think this is definitely a big part of it. And I'm going to kind of talk about how we talk about diabetes in our communities. I think that the way that we describe people with type 2, if in the type 1 community, needs some work, to kind of put it lightly. I really think there is an opportunity for people with type 1, especially if you're in places where type 1 is prioritized or seen in a more favorable light than people with type 2. If you're running in circles, especially on social media, where you are seeing people make jokes or denigrate people with type 2, or especially at the type 2 expense, that I really believe that it is your responsibility to kindly correct people at that moment. Because we won't go as far as we need to unless we're starting to handle some of these issues within our own community. I think within the type 2 community, there has to be a scale back of trying to fit a one size fits all approach to managing type 2 diabetes, which includes telling people how to eat. I think that's like the number one question that people with type 2 have once they're diagnosed: what can I eat? And usually there are some very passionate people about some of their own eating patterns, but also recognizing that not one eating pattern is going to fit every single person. And I think this also expands into how we talk about medication, especially insulin. There is this stigma in the type 2 community that if you have insulin, that means that you failed at diabetes management, but we know that's just not true. So I think it's if someone is celebrating an achievement or if someone is celebrating, hey, I'm no longer on insulin, like that's awesome, that's great. But also recognizing that if someone with type 2 diabetes remains on insulin, that doesn't mean that they're a failure at management. And I think the rest of your question was, how can we work together to overcome these? Yeah. So kind of like that. So just recognizing that we're all on our different journeys with type 1 and type 2. If you're seeing someone using stigmatizing language within our community, that's a time to step up, especially on social media platforms, which is where we are all now, sharing our own stories, and then letting people celebrate their own wins when it comes to living with both diseases.
Thanks, Tiara. And I think that's a really important message, is like, trying to stay as positive and keep boosting people up. And I think, yeah, there's so many like negative feelings, especially I feel like criticalness around type 2 especially. And I feel like, why not just, keep people building up, because it's the only way we're going to survive.
Yes. And I want to point at someone, Bruno mentioned this in the comments and in the chat. He says, I believe the type 1 community somehow reinforces the type 2 community when we say we hadn't developed diabetes because eating too much sugar, or that we can eat whatever we want, and so on. There is a huge disparity in education and how we manage type 2 diabetes. So with type 2, you're told to eat, or actually told what you can't eat. But with type 1, we never really say that. We're saying we say, oh, you can just take the insulin for it, you can bolus for it. But with type 2, it's always, you can't have this, you can't have that. If you are someone from a culture that loves rice, or if you love beans, you gotta scrap it away. We don't have those discussions much in the type 1 community, and that's something I've noticed personally when it came to nutrition. It went from don't eat beef patties or rice and peas when I had type 2, but now that I have type 1, it's like, okay, well, if you're going to do this, then here's how much insulin you should take. So helping me navigate how to do the math on my own, and also giving me the technology and tools to do that, is a big disparity I've noticed.
Absolutely. It's a total difference in how they treat nutrition. I agree with you completely. Sagamla, can you talk a little bit about this maybe in Ethiopia, what you see as sort of the barriers in terms of advocacy between the type 1 and the type 2 communities?
Okay. Mostly the issues especially related to diabetes is more of general. So even when other persons or medical physicians, when they advocate, mostly they use the general term, not specifically by type 1 or type 2. And most people don't know the difference between type 1, type 2, and other types of diabetes. And even when they give you comments, or when the community try to give you answers or share you some information, they give you general, and most of them are like myths, and you cannot apply them in the same in different types of the diabetes that we have currently. Then these days now, more of type 1 is getting a big attention in the country because of the Ethiopian Diabetes Association work that we do with other donors, with CDIC and Life for a Child. And type 2 is more of neglected. It's not like a sensitive issue for our country. And most of them are very old people, and so that they cannot raise their voice for their own rights. And even most people, even myself, when I share experiences, is more of related to type 1 diabetes, not type 2 diabetes, because it's not that much an issue for our country. And regarding the advocacy, but regarding to advertisements and other facilities, they're trying to work in the lower level of health sectors, so that at least they're giving some attention with the treatments. That's all I can say. But regarding the how to overcome our challenge, we need to have fit people, so that especially with type 2, but most of them are not that much educated people, or the way we grow up in our communities, you're not able to express yourself in public areas, so that want to say something, they share their experiences in the community. So what we have to do is, what I think of is that we need to incorporate the type 1 and type 2 people living with type 1 and type 2, so that they can work together, so that they, if they have to share some general ideas, they have to share some general ideas, and they have to share specifics. They have to work together and make sure that everything that we share has to be delivered for the community that we want. And plus, we need to work on the language barriers, because we have the working language in Ethiopia is more of Amharic, and even when we publish it as an association, most of them are in Amharic, so that most people cannot reach them, and the message that we want to share is not deliverable most of the time. So, but now as an experience that we're trying to prepare booklets, so that in different languages, especially the most common language in Ethiopia, Tigrinya, Oromifa, and Amharic. Now it's published and distributed, so that people can have more awareness about diabetes and knowledge at all, so that when we do advocacy, so that we need to consider most of our community, especially in most African countries, even in Ethiopia, there are more than 80 languages within a country, so that we have to make sure at least people have the knowledge of diabetes, so that we can work together.
Great, thank you very much. I'm sorry I cut out for a second, so I missed a bit of your conversation, but I'm sure it was really great. And I think that idea of more knowledge around diabetes and really more understanding is a great thing. And I think in general, it's important to think that while we talk about these issues between type 1 and type 2, for a lot of people outside of the diabetes community, actually, they still don't understand there is a difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So I think we also have to be aware of how we talk about diabetes in general, and then sort of the specifics within our community. Peyang, could you talk a little bit about what you see as some of the barriers and your experiences in Singapore?
Right. So Tiara has actually mentioned a lot of points that I can really associate with. Okay, so especially in the online sphere, I mean, I have encountered communities, diabetes communities, who are actually really toxic. So you go in and you know in the hope that you get support and you get to learn from other people, but it turns out that you know some people are just dominating the community and advocating their agenda, and it's really not a positive environment for those who really wish to join or looking for peer support. And other than that, in terms of public education materials, I think there is still a lack in the distinguishing between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So generally, public education materials generally revolve around type 2 diabetes. with messaging such as cutting down sugar intake, cutting down, looking at increasing exercises and things like that. But these messages actually tend towards people who are at risk of type 2 diabetes. So what about, people who are type 1? How do we create educational materials to educate the public about type 1 diabetes? We know which is completely a different set of things that people need to be aware of. But on a positive note, I have seen improvements in school education materials. So instead of just, they do kind of give a broad understanding, like they teach the students a broad understanding of what diabetes is, without having to touch on going into type 1 or type 2, but just let the students know that there is this condition and what is it medically, what is it about. Yeah, so I think how we can work together is within the diabetes community, we need to understand each other, have an inclusive space, and ultimately why we create the diabetes community is because we want a safe space for us together to find support in each other. But if there are communities out there who fail to make this space safe, then people don't feel secure in finding comfort or in finding support from these communities because they don't trust them anymore because of bad experiences. But then, it could be just one or two bad experiences that turn them off from getting support. But majority of the communities are very friendly. They are welcoming. They welcome all types of diabetes. They don't stigmatize whether you're type 1 or type 2. Look, if you missed it, you are missing a lot of things. And just because I don't think we want, just because of a bad experience, it throws you off getting support. Yeah, so the mindset has to change. And we need to kind of remove or get rid of all these toxic communities among us. So changing our mindset, changing people's mindset, changing our community's mindset is equally important as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Priyan. And I think I would say I want to especially thank you who are people with type 2 diabetes. I think that we don't have enough people on this call, I would say, with type 2. I think we need a more balance between all of the communities and maybe also including gestational diabetes and some of the other things so that we can just ensure that, the whole community is really heard and feels like this is an inclusive space for everybody here. So just last question, I think we have 5 minutes left. What, in terms of, some of the key issues, like looking at global advocacy that you guys think, what do you think that we can really come together on? Like if there are key issues or there are key messages that you believe are ones that we can all, really have one sort of singular message around. I'm wondering from all of you, if you could speak to what you believe those might be. We'll start with you this time, Payan.
Okay, so one key issue, I think mental health, it's really, really not often talked about. And I think, living in this time and period, it's really a cause of concern to actually, and we should really start thinking about how we address mental health issues, not just within the diabetes community, but in general mental health. Yeah, so that's one of the key things that it's really close to my heart.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Sorry, I'm on my phone now because my internet went out. Okay, Tiara, go ahead.
Yeah, 100% agree on mental health or mental well-being and support. As people with diabetes, type 1 or type 2, we make so many decisions, even the smallest decisions that we know that can impact our glucose. That, and also think nutrition is just a big part of my profession. So seeing more unity around different cultural approaches to diabetes and nutrition. I think in terms of how we can work together as the type 1 and type 2 communities, or just the diabetes community in general. I know there's been a lot of talk about moving beyond storytelling and having people with diabetes as part of the decision-making process. So I think having as many diabetes agnostic opportunities to work together as possible is going to be really important for us moving forward. So making sure not just to have a type 1 and a type 2, having multiple people of both categories from different experiences and walks of life to be able to be in some of these decision-making processes.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, I think having people with diabetes and a diverse group of people involved, from the top all the way down is really important. And I think, yeah, you need to see more of that, because it does feel like it's just the person with type 1 diabetes or the person with type 2 diabetes, rather than actually looking at who these people are.
Right. I think it can help remove the sense of tokenism, which doesn't feel good in any setting.
It does not, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, I've been in meetings where my place card just says patient. So yeah, it's not nice. Anyways, Sagamlak, could you tell us what you think might be some of the key issues that we can work together on as a community?
Yeah, even from my experience, that I believe that we should work together on the mental health, especially. It's completely neglected area, especially in Africa, even within the physicians. Then plus the nutrition, because when they advise, they don't know how you live or what kind of food that you have in your house. They just give you a nutrition advice and people don't know where to go. And the other one is access to the medical items, especially with the glucometers and other issues related to strips and lancets, that it is considered as a luxury item, even from simplest glucometer, not even forgetting about the Dixons, the pumps and everything, but just the smallest glucometers issues are in Africa. So that I think most probably even in the developing countries. So I believe that we should work on access to medical items, nutrition and mental health is the point that we can work together.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for mentioning. Access to medicines are close to my heart, and I think access to affordable insulin or oral treatments, access to diagnostics, and access to affordable delivery devices are so important. And I think it's another issue on top of nutrition and education that all people with diabetes need to think about and can come together on. And I think we're out of time, but I'm not positive. Is that right?
Yeah, we are out of time, but
okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much, Molly. Yeah. Thank you so much, Molly, and all the panelists. This was an exciting discussion. And thank you, Molly, for integrating everything together and bringing diabetes as a holistic umbrella view. Just like it's sharing from my own experiences as a physician, sometimes we do get biased and we kind of like pathophysiologically see type 1, type 2 and other types of diabetes with a very different lens. But when it comes to lived experience, I think we all have those unique challenges about type 1 and type 2, and those stories need to come on board. So thank you so much, Molly. You did a fantastic job of integrating it, and all of it comes down to talking about access to medications and getting that educational support, and then beating the stigma when it comes to fighting any kind of diabetes in the community. So transitioning into our next discussion will be about passing the mic, where I will hand over to my other co-chair, Asha, to take over the questions. And this is a time for you to discuss and share your views. So you can use the hand emoji at the bottom side of your chat box, and then feel free to pitch in and let's discuss and share whatever challenges and opportunities we have going forward in the global diabetes advocacy. So over to you, Asha.
Thank you very much, Apurva. I just wanted to add my little bit on the discussion, because I know when we're talking about type 1 and type 2 diabetes, we can become very passionate and we can talk for a very long time. Even looking at the chat, I can see how many people wrote in on the chat, and discussions were just going on and on and on. I am grateful that we are on time so that we can spend a minute into this time to just say thank you very much to the panelists before, and we want to go on to pass the mic now, which is really an interactive session. But because of the time, which is basically 10 minutes and 2 questions, we want to try and have at least 2 people per question. If you can keep it that short, we can probably go to 3, depending on how short the answers are. So the first question is basically...
Asha, I'm just going to interrupt in between. Before we start on passing the mic, there is, just to warm up you guys a little, we have a Slido. So please get your phones up. There's a QR code right there. And Jack will be just sharing.
Slido.
Yeah, here it is. So just get this going. Yeah. So yeah, we have some exciting answers popping up. What inspires you? So we have communication, information and diabetes awareness, working closely with the government. Yeah. And yeah, of course, united voice. It has to be a multi-stakeholder approach, which we need to bring into action. I think sharing from my experiences, I've seen a lot of stakeholders, when you come to go to policymakers, sometimes they segregate type 1, type 2 and diabetes like in a very different picture, and it gets very difficult because they sometimes say, oh, you're just 5% of the community, why do you think we should invest in you? Like the type 2 diabetes is a bigger problem. So it's important that we bring that united voice together and just amalgamate together to cut through that noise. There's some very exciting answers coming up. Collaborating, role models, representation, partnerships, helping people, family perspectives, advocacy, lived experiences, powerful communication material, awareness, being a voice, and shared humanity. Thank you so much for all your answers. And I like that, PLWD 2030. Impatience, real stories. Thank you so much for all your answers. Now we can go to Asha. Asha, you can take over and begin the session for passing the mic.
Okay, thank you, Apurva. So the first question that we want answered is, what are the biggest opportunities going forward in global diabetes advocacy? I shall repeat that. What are the biggest opportunities going forward in global diabetes advocacy? So do we have anybody who wishes to make a comment?
We have Surin.
Hi everyone. So I guess for me it's the fact that we are able to bring people from different perspectives from all around the world to share their lived experiences, which I think contributes to creating a bigger picture of how advocacy should look like even in the future. Once we learn from what has worked and what hasn't, and what kind of partnerships have been successful in the future and what haven't, we are better able to form new strategies and forward-thinking techniques to actually get our voices heard and get our needs answered. So that's it from my side.
Thanks, Surin. Lydia?
Hi, everyone. I think we sharing our stories. And yesterday at our panel discussion, I brought this up that where I come from in Ghana, like there is a lot of misconception about diabetes and people don't talk about it. Even if the person is being diagnosed, or if the person has the disease, like, oh, I can't talk about it. It's some of them think that like the disease is a witchcraft disease and all these, so they don't talk about it. So I think we need to encourage people to share their stories, and if they share their stories, I think we will be heard and we can get help, the help that we need. Thank you.
I see Daniela has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. I believe that we have the opportunity not only to storytell, but also we get a chance to educate. I believe that at this present time, we need to also put importance in the fact that a lot of people out there are miseducated about diabetes as a whole, and that by using proper language, as been talked today, proper tools, we have a chance not only to change the narrative, but also the way people are educated in regards to diabetes from top to bottom. And I believe that could actually make a change within the way our condition is understood throughout the world. Thank you.
I see Michael as well. Sorry, Asha, I'm just helping you here.
That's okay. I know a lot of people have so many questions. Do we need to take the last one and then we'll move on to the second question, because we just have a few more minutes?
Or we can just continue because the second question kind of resonates on the similar
okay,
picture.
That's fine.
So definitely we can go ahead. Yeah. So over to you, Michael.
Also, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to keep it very simple. I think it's targeting and knowing which groups need to hear the message, because there are, especially being type 2, it's type of thing where I think we can speak and educate too much across the board to too many populations, where we do need to target and prioritize which places will start to understand. And I have my own that I'm working on and focusing on, but that's exactly it. And also teaming up with other organizations within your countries and regions to try to solidify that message. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I think it's Renza next. Renza.
I was just, a lot of the conversation in the chat was about, you know, where do we find people with type 2, and I don't have type 2 diabetes, I have type 1 diabetes. But one of the things that I think we have a real opportunity for with our advocacy efforts is to do a lot better about the way we speak about type 2 diabetes. So when I am asked, I'm a spokesperson for Diabetes Australia, so I'm frequently asked, what's the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes? And so I'm really conscious to not say type 1 is an autoimmune condition, you could do nothing about it. Type 2 diabetes is a lifestyle condition, because one, that's just ridiculous and simplistic and not true. And so we talk about modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors, and we do that in a way that's very accessible, that's very easy for people to understand, and we really focus on those non-modifiable risk factors because we want to stop the blame. And I think if we're looking at, you know, global advocacy efforts and you know, what we can all do and all say, I think, I mean, it's difficult, you know, to come up with a script that we all follow, and I certainly wouldn't be suggesting that, but I think we do make an effort to try to, or to move away from using the language that throws type 2 under the bus, to make sure that people understand that type 1 is the autoimmune one, the one that there's no blame for. So I think that the language, but again, the words that we use are really, really critical, and perhaps this is a great opportunity to make sure that, you know, diabetes organizations, the media, everybody who's talking about diabetes, if they're saying the stuff that just continues to add stigma, we call it out. We have to call it out to stop it.
Thank you so much. We, being mindful of the time, I think we can just take one question. So really sorry, Bridget. Sana, if you can go ahead and just quickly take that question. And after that, we have a quick short break before we go out into our breakout sessions. So over to you, Sana. Yeah.
Thank you, Purva. I just wanted to echo what Renza said, and I feel that a lot of discrimination and a lot of toxicity between the two communities that Peiyan was pointing out is because of the language that is being used for type 2 diabetes, and specifically in the last 2 decades, where a lot of focus has been on the prevention campaigns, which are very unthinking. And there are a lot of memes coming out saying, like, for example, don't say diabetes runs in your family, say nobody runs in your families, things like that. They create that toxicity between the type 1 community, because the type 1 community thinks that we are misunderstood because the type 2 community caused it to themselves. And within the type 2 community, well, nobody wants to cause diabetes to themselves. And we do need to talk about the non-modifiable factors as well, to recognize that not that type 2 diabetes, we just cannot stigmatize type 2 diabetes because they were unable to prevent it in the first place.
Thank you so much, Sana. So now let's go for a very short break, and then you can stretch yourself, modify factors of get energy pumping in your body, and then see you after a few minutes, and we'll start exactly at 2:30 Geneva time. I'm sure everyone's enjoying the music. So as we are trickling back in, we will now transition into the breakout sessions, and I will slowly, the music will just go off and we'll come back. Yes. Thank you, Elena. So now since we are all back in the rooms, now I would like to hand over to Alina and Jack, who will now take it from here, where we will talk about where do we move from here and how we can incorporate everything under the Global Diabetes Compact, and how do we go beyond from just talking about it and then bringing everything together. So over to you, Alina and Jack.
Jack, I will hand over to you as you're the taskmaster here.
A lot of pressure being the taskmaster even. No, thank you very much. And now looking ahead to the breakout session number 2, if I could have the next slide, please, Mahim. We will now have, I'm just looking at the agenda, 50 minutes for the breakout session 2, where we're going to try to answer how can we further articulate and explore how we can work together as a community to amplify effective advocacy on diabetes beyond storytelling. And now you're going to have the opportunity to join one of 5 groups. There'll be one group, so there'll be 2 groups on ensuring everyone who needs insulin can access it. There will be 2 groups on addressing diabetes stigma among both communities. There's 2 groups on using inclusive and supporting language to talk about diabetes. There's another 2 groups about talking about prevention for type 2 diabetes in an empowering way. And then there's one group on boosting the profile of people living with diabetes within your target audience. As it was yesterday, if you go to the next slide, please, each group will have a lived experience facilitator. Their role is to ensure that the discussion is really centered around the lived experience. And of course, there'll be a rapporteur there, a note taker, if you like, who will be documenting the key points from each of those discussions, and then we'll have a feedback to plenary. And as I mentioned in the check-in earlier, this is really your opportunity, or one of your opportunities to really ensure that your lived experience is integrated into the breakout discussions, but building on the 2 panels that we've had today, and also the great discussion in the chat. It's really the most active chat box I've seen in Zoom for the last year. That's easy to say. So now we are going to trigger the breakout rooms, and this time you will be able to select a room for you to join. As mentioned yesterday, we would like to try and ensure there's an equal distribution of individuals across the 9 groups. So please be mindful of that when selecting your group. And of course, if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to reach out to either your facilitator or rapporteur, or either ourselves, myself or Elena as well. So we wish you a very healthy and productive discussion over the next 50-55 minutes. And I shall now open up the rooms and hopefully you'll be able to join one of those 5 topics. Good luck.
As the music fades away, let's come back. Let's come back, and we'll have now presentations from our 9 breakout rooms with their facilitators presenting about what was discussed. And so over to you, Asha for introducing the group facilitators and the 9 groups. Okay, so.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you, Asha.
Okay, good. So I hope that everybody is here and that we can begin our presentations so we can be on time. Is everybody there?
I think so, yes.
Yes, okay, good. So can we have group 1 who discussed ensuring everyone who needs insulin can access it? Facilitator Molly Lepesca.
Yep. Hey, sorry. I think I was yesterday, so I wasn't ready. Okay, great. So we had a really, really great discussion. I mean, really, we could have talked for hours. Very active. So I want to just thank all the participants again. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to just try and quickly summarize what we talked about. I mean, I think, as you all know, one of the things, is this 100-year anniversary of the discovery of insulin. Now feels like the time to come together on access to insulin. And we do think it is a great opportunity for advocacy. And there is the power in this community of people who use insulin, which is 70 million people or more. It's a huge amount of people, and we can all use our voice. Access to insulin is availability and affordability, which are important, particularly looking in the sort of global perspective. Insulin is can lead to sort of discussions about other elements of diabetes care. So it can lead to talks about supply of devices and self-monitoring and care and support. So it can be a good entry point. And we also think that insulin, even though access to insulin is easy to understand, it's very complex and the issues vary from country to country. And these differences should be acknowledged in the advocacy because it can change. And in terms of targets, we were just talking about things that we could talk to decision makers about. We really focused, because we ran out of time, on government to talk about how cost effective actually treatment of insulin can be, rather than to paying for treatment rather than the complications. It is sort of a better deal, I guess, if you want to say it that way. It's critical that diabetes is looked at as a community issue. It's not just a health issue, but it's a community issue, and that it should be looked at sort of holistically. So understanding how many people in your country have diabetes and starting from there, rather than just saying, okay, we're going to fix insulin. You need to look at diabetes care in general. And then also talking about, ways that maybe we could set a lower price, a global price for access for insulin. So $1 a vial or something like that, or ways to better incorporate it into the universal health care campaign, ensuring that there's free insulin access. So we talked about so many other things, but that's, in my 90 seconds, how much I can summarize. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Molly. You kept on time. Can we go to group 2 by Emma Clackman, also discussing ensuring everyone who needs insulin can get it or access it?
Thank you, Asha. So the main theme sort of underpinning our session was actually, in a way, dismantling the topic of this subgroup. The topic asked us to look at ensuring access to insulin, but we agreed in a huge way that it isn't just insulin alone. There's an entire ecosystem to look at in tandem with insulin, because if we look at insulin alone, we risk never finding a solution to the problem and are only faced solving and resolving again and generally fighting fires. We had experiences coming from Mexico, Uganda, and Zimbabwe, and many of our participants said that there is a very tough time acquiring access and availability of insulin. There's a lack of government activity regarding this issue, as the public health systems really don't provide any diabetes-related supplies beyond insulin. And this is particularly problematic as test strips can often be more expensive than insulin in some countries. We agreed that NCDs were not the top priority on the health agenda and that we don't see it being reflected in policies and programs. So we really spent a lot of time questioning what do our decision makers need to hear. And we agreed that a multi-pronged approach must be implemented and use all platforms to make as much noise as possible and to disseminate our message. We agreed that governments and donors need a full understanding of this issue, and one method alone is not enough. We also said that we have to increase existing epidemiological country data and research efforts regarding diabetes, because that actually is painting a picture of the reality. Insulin is just one tool in the bag we went on to talk about, and can be dangerous when it's not used properly. So health literacy and educational efforts, we agreed, were essential when prescribing insulin to people with diabetes. And when we speak about insulin, education must be brought along the same plane. I'm not sure if I'm going over time, but we just talked about so much, but the resounding message is that we just cannot wait anymore. It's been 100 years since the discovery of insulin, and this should have been available to us widely from the start, and we need to reclaim that power, and we demand governments to provide it without haste. I just want to finish on one point, which is the elephant in the room, really, about COVID, and that in terms of the pandemic, in the same way that the vaccine is spoken about, insulin for people with diabetes is a lifesaver. No insulin, no life for many people. We need to speak on the importance of insulin in people's lives in the same way that vaccines are being spoken about now. If we could just take a little bit of the spotlight there, we think that would be a simple and very effective message. Thank you
so much, Emma. I was just trying to interrupt you that you're going overboard. So just to be mindful of the time, I'm just going to give an important reminder that each group has 3 minutes to present their discussions, and you can also use the slides which you've created in your group. So over to you, Asha, to introduce the other groups and their facilitators. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We move on to group 3, who facilitator Crystal Boyer, addressing diabetes stigma among both communities. And remember that you have 3 minutes to put forward your presentation.
Okay, great. If Gertrude can just share her screen.
Yes, you can share your slides.
But I can begin. Our topic was addressing diabetes stigma amongst both communities, so the type 1 and type 2 community. And we spoke about how we would like to do this and what types of advocacy and influencing strategies would we like to use. And our discussion started firstly with value-based advocacy. Renza's discussion really hit home to a lot of us by using the heart and the mind, by using the story as well as the stats and the facts, really does go a long way. We want to foster an environment to have an open, honest, real discussion whenever we're talking about both types. We also want to start community-centered, so focus on the community discussions, then take those national and then regional. By educating and advocating within the communities, you get a lot of foot soldiers to be able to share your message. You're able to tweak your message. You're able to learn from the communities, maybe what works and what does not. We also spoke about doing the little things, and that the little things are also advocacy, wearing your pumps with pride, using the one-on-one discussions as important points, whether you're in a grocery store or at a car wash, and that using language as well is important. We also spoke about using public figures. So the examples of Theresa May and Viola Davis came up. So people who are living with the condition, but as well people who are caregivers, people who are passionate, who have a large voice, massive followers like, Rihanna and her HIV and AIDS movement should be used as well. But we also asked the question, how can we make it easier for more people to get involved? how can we encourage more voices within the diabetes space without encouraging them, without forcing them to have to go and sign up for a diabetes organization? How can we encourage more voices in the space, but similar voices within the space and one united message? In terms of our message, the key one was leaving no one behind, and definitely to include youth voices and to I guess, leverage diabetes in any health space. So whenever we're talking about COVID, talk about COVID and diabetes. Whenever we're talking about HIV, talk about HIV and diabetes, because people with diabetes live with more than one condition. And then we need to leverage the synergies between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So when we're discussing diabetes in pregnancy, the symptoms, the diagnosis, the complications, we need to not forget that there are so many synergies between them, and use that as leverage. There was a lot that we discussed. I think we actually got cut in the middle of our discussion, but that was basically the gist of it.
Well, thank you very much, Crystal, and thank you for sticking to your time. Can we move on to group 4, same theme, addressing diabetes stigma among both communities, from Kristen Whitney Daniels?
Great. And Jennifer, if you can share the screen of the key points, that would be great. It was such a joy being with everyone, and I'm so glad that we were able to talk about the stigmatization between type 2 and type 1 diabetes and how we can kind of work together moving forward. One of the main things we talked about, to no surprise, is messaging. And Asha actually brought this up, was the question of what does somebody with diabetes look like? And I mean, as you can see here, we all look totally different. And I don't think that's what is in people's minds when they hear the word diabetes. So when we talk about diabetes, we really need the people at the top to show that there is no look for it, that we're all different, and to really use all of us as kind of the people who are talking about it and the people who really need to be the vision of it. I was really inspired by that question because, you know, it's been great getting to know everybody. And I know that we all look different, but beyond us, that's not necessarily the case. We also talked a lot about, because this is the 100th year anniversary, about access to insulin and supplies and how there's a huge disparity between type 1 and type 2, that type 2 diabetics aren't necessarily being talked to about insulin pumps or CGMs, and that we need to work on that together because we know that insulin isn't accessible for type 1s nor type 2s, and leveraging kind of any energy that we're able to gain in the type 1 community and apply that to the type 2 community. We also talked a lot about the messaging of making sure that type 2 is not a sign, for type 2 diabetics, that using insulin is not a sign of failed diabetes, that it is like water, it is like air, and that people should have that sort of accessibility to it as any of those other items. And another huge thing that we talked about was education. I think we have heard it come up time and time again about how we need education at all levels. And that includes diabetics, that we can get to know each other's different types, but also making sure that we're holding people accountable at the top, especially when they're only using our stories, but not putting the funds where their mouths are speaking, and making sure that, I think one of the comments that came out was, it's tokenism if there's no financing behind it. And so making sure that governments and other donors are really putting money behind it to make sure that education and accessibility is available at all levels. I think that's it.
Thank you very much. So can I pass it over to Apurva to follow?
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine. That was very insightful. Now we will pass over to group 5. The topic was using inclusive and supportive language to talk about diabetes, and our facilitator who's going to present is Mark Brown.
Thank you very much. I think you can see my screen, right? So our topic was language. So, and it was a very so productive discussion, since we discussed about language, not just in terms of what language and stigma, which we had discussed previously in the different panels, but you know, the way that the communication is conducted. So not only what, but how and why the communication is being addressed, and how it is arriving, it reaches people with diabetes. So and then also being aware that people appreciate being given choice, and that they hear their language, the language that they can understand, the language that makes sense to their community, not just the medical language that would not, you know, reach understanding by them, by their family, or by their community. And what exactly needs to be in the messages? What are the message that need to be delivered? So that there was a suggestion for a checklist of key messages, and including this in psychosocial support, since the diagnosis of diabetes, it's key to have appropriate language being used in order to avoid stigma. And regarding stigma, also the risks of overprotection leading to stigma, and also the value of language bridging this risk. And also one thing important that was brought in our group was the importance of addressing the social environment issues that would come, you know, with language, but would not addressing language issues would not be enough if we are not addressing social environmental issues as well. So when the messages that our group identify as key in the Global Diabetes Compact are: access to care is not a privilege, and also the need for transnational accessibility, that people with living with diabetes must be always invited to the decision-making process, treatment accessibility and availability to all, and the partnerships with private sector may favor that, and also to be careful and with unethical practice on insulin and other medicines and equipment practices.
Thank you, Mark. We'll have to stop you here. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, so then I'll hand over to our next group, group 6, and same topic, and the facilitator is Daniela Rojas. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Apurva. So we also had a very passionate, interesting conversation about language and its importance in changing the narrative around how diabetes has been understood throughout this 100 years, and how we can make a change in regards to how it's going to be presented and the status quo. And it was wonderful to hear from all the participants. And one of the main things that came up was the importance of having diversity within every storytelling, strengthen the differences between each community in order to fight tokenism and allow more involvement. The importance also of not only working with the communities who live with the condition, but also being able to identify synergies between both communities and people who live outside our community or do not live with the condition. But it was very clear that when we do this, it is very important to have a good balance, so that the light is always on the community, but how can we work together in order to make this change? It was also important to recognize the gaps to access to a better or major challenge is one of the biggest things in order to get up to this change. And it's very important to revisit the inclusive nature of the narrative, how the conversation beyond the community jargonizing and simplifying this message. We also talk about the importance of recognizing our audience, identifying who have the power to drive the change, who needs to be influenced, for instance, healthcare professionals, and tailor the message to each of the audiences in order to make it as successful as possible. It was also brought up the importance of exploring the role of people who live with experiences in changing the narrative and identifying the alternative narratives that can support us. And one of the things that was very important is how to actually acknowledge that we are the experts, as has been said throughout the whole day, but to actually recognize that we need the tools in order to become proper advocates and be able to share this message. Acknowledging as well the strength in the numbers in order to seek support, which was talked previously about the data and the storytelling working hand in hand, so that this can actually amplify the voices in other communities, as well as understanding the importance of language when it comes to individuals needing holistic care and promoting person-centered care instead of one-filled-all approach, which can be stigmatizing. Highlighting the need for education training that makes this narrative strategic, combining both the heart and the mind, acknowledging the centrality of access to the narrative. And as a whole, we came up with addressing the cultural barriers to dispel myths, tackle stigma and discrimination, so that we can shift responsibly to the individual system addressing the lifestyle. That was my timer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danny. Now we'll go on to our next group, Group 7, talking about prevention of type 2 diabetes in an empowering way. Over to you, Michael. So Michael Donohue, he's the facilitator for Group 7. Can you take over? For Group 7, whoever's presenting.
I'm just going to check if he's still here. Michael, maybe you can go to the other.
I'm sorry. I'm still here. For some reason, I could not get the mute to come off. So my apologies. Okay, so I will be very quick now, even briefer. Some of the questions really came up very quickly was what types of advocacy and influencing strategies do we want to use? Because of the diversity of our group, we had many different answers to this one, from scientific to government. But I think a key statement here was use language such as I live with diabetes rather than I have T1, T2 or others, which is something we've been saying the past 2 days. Who do we want to tell our story? Who do we want to see ambassadors? The key message here we also agreed was educate at a grassroots level, schools and parents, ambassadors who can provide a basic education of health, nutrition, and activity. For example, food companies to make healthier food, pharmaceutical companies to increase access to medicines, government to show the benefit of having healthier citizens. And I think that was a key thing in discussing COVID. The healthier the citizens, the healthier the nation having gone through a pandemic. How can we leverage the synergies between type 1 and type 2 and across sectors? We need to distinguish between T1s and T2s more effectively, ensure that the correct treatments and diagnosis are given, increase knowledge of T1 among HCPs, usually T2 is more well known. Both T1 and T2 need equitable access to management tools, which has been discussed by other groups. Moving to a needs-based approach, but this was one that was added by Riva, which I think a lot of us liked. Both T1 and T2 diabetes can develop at any age, any stage. We need to stop distinguishing it, by historical means, but more, again, due to diabetes itself. Key messages of the Diabetes Compact needs to use publicity created by the 100th anniversary of insulin discovery. The Compact is celebrating going forward in a new way and opening up new possibilities. A negative, that's the positive, but the negative message could be in 2021, still a third of the people cannot access insulin globally. And the government needs to be at the forefront of advocating for better diabetes care. And what do our decision makers need to hear? Diabetes needs to be given a priority. It deserves of securing adequate funds for care. We have started something and we will carry on until we reach our goal, which I think is my favorite, and put pressure upon pharmaceutical companies to provide more affordable medicines. And I'll reiterate the point made about food companies and reducing processed foods or foods that are contained items that raise blood sugar. I give the rest of my time back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for being on time. So we just have 2 more groups, and I really apologize to all the previous groups. I'm too hard on time, so sorry I interrupted you in between. So let's go to our last 2 groups. Group 8, talking about prevention for type 2 diabetes in an empowering way. And a facilitator is, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrong, Ozoranke.
Osai.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Bianca, please, can you put up the slide, please? Oh, shit. Oh, okay, thank you. Bianca, can you go back to the first slide? The very first slide. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you very much. Our topic was talking about prevention of type 2 diabetes in an empowering way. And that became a sensitive topic for all of us because it's something we are all passionate about. So everyone came up, my group was really loaded with a lot of people with passion. So, and they all came up with different suggestions from across the world. Well, the first thing, what was very common to all the participants was everyone wanted education. Education is key, and the government needs to be involved. So the first thing we address is if the government is involved in passing out, in giving out education, in advocacy, we can help. It will go a long way in reducing type 2 diabetes, because type 2 diabetes affects the working population. It affects the direct power back of, let's say, the working class of the economy, of any country's economy. So there's a need to really do something about it in preventing it from spreading or affecting more people. So the government needs to be really involved in advocacy, and not just advocacy alone, put up programs, farm, land, encourage healthy eating, put up programs, put up government policies, put up structures that would encourage a message out there that everyone should eat healthy and make the environment conducive for people to farm and grow their food in a comfortable way, because we are in a civilized, we are in the 21st century where there are no more lands available for most people. So bring up, there are more innovative way of growing one's food in your backyard, in your compound, or making it available in a community. So if government is involved, these things will become readily available and people will be eating unhealthy. And then we also came up with the government should, in all of it, all our suggestions, we needed the government participation and all stakeholders, including the pharmaceutical company, everybody involved on it, including other NGOs. So we're just determining that if you can encourage people, if the government can be involved in the education advocacy, people, it will go down well with people. Somebody in Ghana, in India, gave us an example of what the government is doing, how the government is involved in exercises. Here they put up they put up a program that is encouraging people to do yoga, to take a walk. India has the largest population in the world, but they're able to deliver on that. That is brilliant. And also, they came up with nutrition. Nutrition is key to driving down the number of type 2 diabetes. So if everyone is eating healthy, starting from preaching to our children, making water, fruits, vegetables attractive to them, they start eating it, families are involved in encouraging that. That will help to drive down type 2 diabetes.
Thank you, Leon. I'll have to interrupt you here. You're over time.
Oh, is it 3 minutes already? Oh my goodness. Oh, geez.
That's what passion does.
Oh, thank you very much.
And now we'll jump to our next group. And this is the last group, which is group 9. And I think there are a lot of people in this group. So boosting the profile of people living with diabetes with your target audience, a government journalist, public and researcher, and our facilitator is Sana Ajmal. Over to you, Sana.
Thank you so much, Apurva. Dan, can we put on the slides? I'm unable to share my screen here. Do we have Dan with us? Okay, I'll just go with.
You do. I'll just do that now.
No problem. I'll start. So we started with the question of like a few key points of that the status quo is one that puts people with diabetes in a negative light, with some shame associated with it. The messages generally shared and the stories generally shared are very negative. And we would want to ensure that positive messages are shared to change and boost our profile, which is the key topic of this group. The second point, we were really inspired by Renza saying that we need to back up stories with data. So yes, that is something that would boost up the profile of people living with diabetes, sharing their stories. We also need to focus on what is new, important, and relevant. To ensure that we're sharing relevant information. So including our lived experiences in patient or person-centered discussions, we have to ensure that it is realized that lived experiences are irreplaceable, and only by listening to lived experiences can we understand and explain what the key issues and challenges are. These lived experiences can also extend beyond living with the condition, but being in contact with the consequences of diabetes as such. So we cannot look at a one-size-fits-all solution. So we need to look into local communities and groups and what is being shared there. The local communities and groups should be involved to make sure that the message sticks and is relatable to local populations. Ambassadors of people living with diabetes should be able to leverage public personalities, for example, such as actors, having them as allies on our side and proactively advocating for action because they live with diabetes too. However, at the same time, we also discussed that the everyday person living with diabetes, his or her story is also very important because that's what brings in the diversity and the relationship everyone feels with that story. Because it might sometimes happen that the privileged person could access care, but those who cannot might not actually relate to the story of the privileged person only. Telling our stories is insufficient, and action needs to come from that. We're not a voice to be used for show or pity or for stigma. We need to learn from HIV and AIDS experiences and making the case that everyone in the population can support and improved health and livelihoods. There was a discussion about fostering and supporting patient-led organizations from marginalized populations. And if government don't take these organizations seriously, then the public will not take the narrative seriously either. And the most important of all, I suppose, is offering training to best support those who want to be champions and advocates for it to boost the profile. Talking about the story that we want to tell the world on the 100th anniversary, again, there was emphasis on not just using the story, but putting them into actionable programs and tasks. And people living with diabetes should not be othered, sharing personal experiences of success rather than preventing us from reaching our goals. We also do things that everyone else can do. So the positivity needs to come out, and it should not be weaponized as a weakness. We need to reflect on practicalities of insulin as well, how we're still struggling with issues of access and accessibility, which is an embarrassment that can be fixed with existing solutions. However, we also need to look into the stigma and fear with insulin, specifically in the type 2 community, or even with the type 1 community when they're recently diagnosed, which can lead to people refusing insulin. And here is where the patients share information about using insulin can play an important role. A very important point.
Thank you, Sana. I'm intervening right now.
I'm sorry, but I just can't miss this one out. Sorry for this. So there was a very strong point about using COVID-19 as a lesson for creating an urgency for access to insulin, just like there is urgency for access to COVID-19 vaccines.
Thank you so much, Sana. And I'm really apologizing for intervening in between. Yeah, so now we just have just few minutes left, and I would like to hand over to Dan to kind of amalgamate all the groups and share his comments after such insightful discussions in all the groups. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Apurva. Yes, I will do my best. I haven't been able to capture all of the richness and thought-provoking questions and themes that you've shared with us today. The conversation has been so important. Now, I don't want to oversimplify, but I keep coming back to one thing, and that fundamentally, the lived experiences of people of diabetes that everybody has here adds value to the policies and programs and interventions that are being done across the world that you can't get from anywhere else. So in our group, Edith made a vital point that our voices are not for show or for pity. And I would like to be very candid and honest. I think for too many people, including colleagues, some colleagues in WHO, those lived experiences can be seen as a tokenistic luxury that gratifies pre-decided positions and pre-existing narratives. But that tokenism is profoundly wrong. We need to think about it another way. And that is that if we aren't including the voices of people with lived experience in media, advocacy, and policy discussions, the voices to whom it matters most, then these discussions are flawed and they're incomplete. If we want to design robust and comprehensive interventions, they can't be robust if we're ignoring the voices that they matter most. And if we frame it like that, it's common sense. Why wouldn't we do it? So part of our conversations can be about celebrating and showing the added value that our advocacy and lived experiences can bring, pulling together the hearts and the minds, using the expertise to explain the nuances and complexities that link type 1, type 2, gestational diabetes and risk factors, and making our key decision makers act. Understanding that learning and improving the quality of life of people with lived experience is common sense, and so much suffering is just needless and unacceptable. I'm particularly glad that Emma and Molly in their groups to discuss insulin stress the importance of thinking about everything that comes with insulin, from devices and medical kit through to stigma, fear, and misconceptions. As we approach the 100th anniversary of the discussion of insulin, something I will push my colleagues to do at WHO is not see the anniversary as a celebration. It's also a day of grief, of arbitrary and needless health complications. And despite a century's worth of evidence and benefits, it's a day of missed opportunities, seemingly because of ideology and stigma. As Renza said earlier, we stand on the shoulders of people who have lost their lives from diabetes. The juxtaposition of COVID-19 and insulin that came up through the groups shows that if the political will exists, anything is possible. But it also makes clear that clearly lived experiences of diabetes haven't been taken seriously enough. So I would like to give you 4 commitments that I will take to my colleagues at WHO. Number 1, I will push for us to stop the oversimplification in our discussion of diabetes, but instead learn from your lived experiences to better frame nuances between type 1, type 2, gestational diabetes, and also some of the interplaying aspects like mental health that Pei Yang mentioned, like the systems and social determinants of health that drive disease, as Daniela mentioned in her group. Number 2, picking up on requests for support and training in the breakouts and from Renza this morning, I'd like to explore writing a language commitment and position for WHO's work on diabetes. And that is a narrative guide that needs to be co-created with people with lived experience. Number 3, I'd like to push my colleagues to do a lot better when we talk how we speak about type 1, not just as autoimmune, and type 2 just as lifestyle. As Tiara said this morning, it's not about a lifestyle condition that people have willingly given themselves, even if we aren't deliberately stigmatizing. By focusing on behaviors and framing them as individual deficiencies, we can entrench values and framings that are unhelpful to our cause. And 4th, our Global Diabetes Compact, we really, really want, I hope Elena and Jack make that very clear, we really want your experience and expertise. And that can be in a range of ways. Establishing ambassadors to give people with type 1 and type 2 a louder voice at the table, encouraging celebrities and people with large followings to be more vocal about it, but in a way that is still relatable to everybody. I really encourage you to apply for the calls of experts that were raised this morning by Elena to support our strategic and technical advisory groups on NCDs. And as well as the big stuff, I thought a point that Crystal made was superb, which was the little things are also advocacy. And identifying the leaders and speakers and tones of voice and key messages we have to normalize the discourse is going to be absolutely crucial. So we can do the big stuff, but Crystal, you're absolutely right. The little things are also advocacy. So those are my 4 commitments to you. In return, I ask only 2 things. Number 1, that we continue these discussions and collaborations beyond our 3 days together. And number 2, that you continue to hold WHO to account. Keep pushing for co-creation and keep telling us where we fail. So I'm really inspired and excited that after this session, we've got loads of ideas that we can take back and really push for improving the co-creation and lived experiences of diabetes. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Dan. Now, as we are moving closer to the day, we have 2 special keynote listener reflections from people living with diabetes. So having listened actively to the presentations and discussions and all the breakout sessions during the day, we have our first keynote listener, Yamarai from T1 International, and she's actually from Zimbabwe. Over to you, Yamarai.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for this opportunity that you've afforded me. It's always an honor, being in the same room with people that go through the same thing as you do every day, people that share your passion. So I think the one thing that really struck me today was from the first session, it's possible to reach everyone. And I think the previous speaker said that we would have failed if we get to the 100th anniversary without having everyone on board. Everyone must be on board. We need to amplify our voices. So yes, it's possible to reach everyone, to reach even that person in the most rural part of Zimbabwe, that person who's had to travel hundreds of kilometers just to get an insulin shot. These are things that I've heard throughout the day, things that I've heard different speakers say. And it's, I think we're all in consensus. That's the general consensus. And so then, yes, it's important. Affordability, definitely, yes, important. And, the one thing that I always say is everyone needs to get there. And when I say everyone, I mean the type 1 community, the type 2 community. Payan said something along the lines of, the community is a bit divided. Yes, it has been divided for years. And we will not get to our final destination if we stay like that. So it's I think the take home for me was, we need a united diabetes community. We can't keep saying type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes. The one thing that we have in common is definitely diabetes. And so it's important for us to change our language, change our mindset, even within our diabetes community, because this is where most of the stigma comes from. It comes from ourselves. So we're not going to be able to help each other. We won't be able to help ourselves. No one will embrace us for as long as we can't embrace each other. Another thing that I've picked up from just the language matters movement, I think something that Renzo is really passionate about, something that I'd like to add on is, it's not only language from people with type 1 diabetes, people with type 2 diabetes, people in the diabetes community. It's even us transforming our healthcare professionals' language. Because it's type, in my interactions with people with type 1 diabetes, with people with type 2 diabetes, it's sort of like a blame game. I think people with type 2 diabetes would feel very strongly about this. It's the language centered around type 2 diabetes feels like blame language. And it's, when you get to the type 1 aspect, it's a mental health thing, a mental health challenge. It's something to do with type 1 diabetes affects your mental health. But as I said before, it's not just that. It's not just type 1 and type 2 diabetes. It's the language surrounding the whole condition. And I don't like calling it a disease. So it's a condition that we're managing, that we're doing very well with. So these are some of the key points that I picked up today. And even I think I touched on healthcare professionals, I'll go back there. It's important that when we reach out to our healthcare professionals, when we speak on language, that they understand that the diabetes that we're living is not the diabetes that they've read in their medical school textbooks. the things that they say affects us. And I think this is probably where that mental fatigue comes from, if we look at it properly. So they're taught about language, yes. We need to teach each other about language, but we also need to teach each other just that art of listening. We need to listen. When a person speaks, we need to be able to listen to them. And
Samurai, can you finish off in 30 seconds, please?
Okay,
Sorry
sure,
about
30.
that.
So yes, so I think I'll repeat again. If we can't get there alone, if we can't get there together, then we would have failed. We are supposed to get there. Everyone is supposed to get there at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yamarai, for your insights in what you heard today. And I would like to move on to our next person or keynote listener, who is Reva Greenberg. She's the diabetes advisor, inspirational speaker, and trainer from the United States. So can we have Reva, please? You have 5 minutes.
Hi, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And just want to acknowledge everybody who's here today collaborating, co-collaborating this effort. Since today was so rich with communication and key messages, I think one of our overarching messages is that the WHO is, just as we've had 100 years of insulin, now we're on a new path, new possibilities, looking forward to what's in front of us. And one of the things the WHO is marking this milestone with is involving people living with diabetes in this Global Diabetes Compact, and recognizing how essential and important, and that we are expert contributors to this. So I just want to acknowledge that. And then I want to kind of give a review of what we heard this morning, because it's so easy to forget what happened earlier on as we got so much information out of our breakout sessions. So what happened earlier today, and then leave us with, I think, some open-ended questions. So forgive my reading, but I took a lot of notes. This is probably the easiest way to do this. So we began with the idea of creating strategic and tech advisory committees on prevention and control of non-communicable diseases, and also a tech advisory group on diabetes. And the importance there, the caveat, is that we're having people living with diabetes as key experts in these committees. So already we're showing we have a stake in the ground. We have skin in the game, as they say. Something else we heard this morning, and that is that the stories we hear about ourselves, people living with diabetes in the news, most people think were poorly representative. And so we need to create some new narratives. And I think part of the new narrative that we're grappling with, which is wonderful, is the differences between type 1 and type 2 and the commonalities between type 1 and type 2. And also I heard this a couple of times today, that we need to go beyond our echo chamber. And I think this is part of professional deformation. We talk amongst ourselves. We're so used to the language we use and what we think. But of course, to engage the greater public and the constituents whom we need to engage, we need to go beyond our echo chamber, which I think this is a wonderful effort and initiative to do. So that's what stories need to do going forward, help us go beyond this echo chamber. Because in truth, everything happens in relationship. Everything happens in interactions, right? That's when we really realize what we think and are able to communicate it with others. So we heard about framing, which is a wonderful tool, and the idea that our emotions are stronger than logic. We have to bring hearts and minds together. And Renza in particular talked about this idea that we are stronger when we bring hearts and minds together. And I'd like to add one point to this, which is hearts and minds and connection, because I think we need to add connection as a real concept. When we have connection, we tend to have trust and safety and compassion. And so that all makes the autonomic nervous system work for us. So hearts and minds and connection. And I think then physiologically, biologically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, we're ready to go. Another topic we discussed today was leveraging the synergies of type 1 and type 2. And I think this is a topic that's ripe for further exploration. We know that both groups feel stigma. We know that somebody said 90% of the action in the social media space is by type 1, 10% by type 2. And so in a way, a lot of type 2s are in the closet. And, it's easy to understand because the idea is they created it. So we need to both educate type 2s that they didn't create it, help them walk out of the closet, as well as educate the general public. Okay, and so I guess some of the questions that I still see as open questions, we could ask ourselves going forward, as we move along creating, what does success look like? Because there's always a tendency to say, what do we want to tell people? What information do we want to push? But one of the key questions is, what do people need to hear? What will move the different constituents that we know need to be involved in this effort? So what would success look like for each of these groups? And kind of a sub-question of that is, what do we want people to understand, to think, to feel, and to do? Right? As we come up with our messaging and our actions, if we think about it in terms of what do we want people to understand, to think, to feel, and to do, it gives us perhaps a more focused lens.
No, you've got some of your time, but I'm giving you 30 to 45 seconds to just wrap up. It's a really great flow.
That's perfect. That's as much as I need. And so I was just going to say, we need to look at who the constituents are who are important to the Global Diabetes Compact, like health ministries, government, pharmas, insurance companies, big food. What do they need to do? Because we can't be successful by ourselves. And in closing, the all important question in communication, we all always learned, what's in it for me? We have to answer that question for all our constituent groups. How can we help everyone be successful if we help people living with diabetes be successful? That's it.
Thank you very much, Riva, for giving us some thought-provoking questions and your response. I just want to pass over to my co-chair, Apurva, to do some closing remarks. We've been really, really good on time.
Thank you so much, Asha. Yeah, this is fantastic that today we will be closing the day right on time. So a little about what I learned today and what are the key words which I take back from this session is like one very strong quote, which kind of like I really resonate with and I take back home today is a quote shared by Crystal. We share a common language. We are the native speakers and we are fluent. We are translators, we are teachers, and not just advocates. All advocacy brings something on the table. All we need to work alongside experts as translators and follow a strategic plan. this is something which summarizes the whole day. And we've seen so much information that has flown in the breakout sessions, so much energy that has come out in discussions. It has been such an insightful day where we learned about how to advocate strategically with a value-based framework and teach the language of diabetes to the world. So I think there's so much I've learned on this day. And there's something which I really always ignored when it came to type 2 diabetes as a physician. And I thought that probably I was biased because I've had type 1 diabetes for over 13 years. And I just felt that type 2s can be managed well. But I think that's something which all physicians have, because we have not been taught that in medical school. And I think, as Jack pointed out, that taking those small nuances of type 1 and type 2 diabetes and bringing everything in a value-based framework is what we need to change. And we need to change the narrative and go beyond the echo chamber, as Riva pointed out. So the last thing, in conclusion, I just want to say that where do we say that we have achieved it? Where do we call it like, oh, we've done it? I think that's where we are heading towards, and all comes under an overarching theme that we all deserve that life of dignity, a life to not be locked in, a life to not worry about access to insulin, not worry about medical facilities, and not being locked in a stigmatized community. So we need to be a voice on the table and implement by meaningful engagement and through strategizing small nuances of type 1, type 2 diabetes and building it from here. Yeah. Thank you so much. Over to you, Asha. Now, I think you have insightful comments for the day.
Well, I don't have much time to do it, but I will stick to time. And I just wanted to say that I had a great opportunity of being a co-chair with you, Apurva. Thank you very much. And today's session went really, really well. I was really taken up when we were talking about the differences between type 1 and type 2, and to realize that so many people are passionate, because I was busy reading all the comments and making comments of my own too, in terms of really bringing forth education. And one of the things that I really appreciate is for Dan, in terms of summing it up and saying, what are the things that we're going to take back to the WHO? And for me, that is key, because we can talk all the talk and now we need to walk the walk. But, so it's important that all the countries that are represented and those who are not represented, that we be taken into account, and that after this, all our voices are heard and something is done on the higher level, which of course I know with the Global Diabetes Compact and then further on to the UN meetings. And really, it's an honor to be part of this. And I have learned so much by meeting so many people. And I really thank everybody for participating and being passionate about type 1 and type 2 diabetes, because it's a condition. And as I said in one of the things, it's, people always ask me, they're surprised when I tell them I'm a person living with type 2 diabetes, because what do you look like? You don't look like somebody who is suffering with type 2 diabetes. And it's not suffering, it's living with and maintaining my condition. So thank you very much to everyone who participated today. We have not ended. I'm going to pass over to Jack and Alina to do the final summing up.
Thank you so much, Apurva and Asha, for so beautifully summarizing the day, and Yamurai and Riva as well. It's 4:30 over here. Started 3.5 hours ago with 2 tiny breaks. I'm not tired at all. I feel really inspired, and I'm actually really excited that we have another day. I would be so sad if this was it. I've been paying a lot of attention to the chat. There's so much great discussion going on there as well, and a lot of discussion as well that is really important for tomorrow. Some really great suggestions as to how people living with diabetes will be represented in the launch summit that we'll be talking about tomorrow, before we then sort of have a look at what the next steps are. But there were so many great, very, very concrete suggestions. It was a really fantastic day, and I just want to acknowledge that my director, Bente Mikkelsen, is in the room as well. I'm really pleased that she was able to join for the last 40 or so minutes of this meeting, hearing some of the summaries and reflections about the day. So thank you, everyone, and I'll hand over to Jack for the very final remarks.
Thank you, Elena. And look, I'll be very, very brief, because I think our co-chairs have done a sensational job overall today, but also in terms of summarizing the discussions over what has been a hugely positive and energetic day. And, you know, hearing such strong messages, not only from all of our speakers and all of our co-chairs and all of you in the room today, it makes the role of our next steps a very clear path. And I think Dan was very clear in terms of what some of those asks would be. I think there are more asks that we will hear from tomorrow, and that's really important. And again, that will be divided into or split between the Global Launch Summit in terms of what you wish to see from that, but also, again, the next steps within the wider context of the Global Diabetes Compact. And I just wanted to share some of the key themes that I thought which quite interestingly came up within today's discussion. And I think the themes of solidarity, diversity, value, and respect came up. And I think they're really particularly important, not only for this consultation, but again, these were the same themes that were highlighted in the December consultation. But these are also some of the same themes that we hear from WHO in terms of the COVID-19 response, in particular from our Director General. So I think there's a lot of commonality in terms of those principles and values as we go forward. And it's very exciting. I feel very energized going into the final day. And again, this will be, you know, once the consultation finishes tomorrow, it will be the first of many steps going forward. And again, we will really very much work towards defining those next steps even further tomorrow. So we will start again at 1 o'clock Geneva for the final day. We will again share the slides and share the recording later this evening. And yeah, a huge gratitude to everyone who's participated today, including our co-chairs who have done a sensational job. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.